This is One Up Indie. Now we will introduce a simple stationary enemy to our game. This monster looks super mean and can hurt us if we come too close. Yes, this is an evil being. His co-workers didn't treat him good, his girl left him because he wasn't evil enough, and his caffeine addiction made him a rage-filled menace to all in its path. And now he comes for the player to get its ultimate revenge. Or maybe he's just friendly, who knows. Let's get started. We create an enemy object and assign our sprite to it. Put him into our game. As expected, he does nothing. Let's set him up so all the enemies get universal variables and behaviors that we adjust when we put them all later in each level. What do we need? First of all, the create event. The create event is run only once when the instance is placed and determines upfront key variables that are being used. What are those key variables? Easy, things that define every enemy. HP is the indicator how tough he is, attack damage how much he can hurt us in return, and attack rate how many times he can actually do that. For upcoming enemies we need to know what type it is, and finally at which range will the enemy actually attack the player. Now we come to an easy but not very effective way to harm the player, a simple collision. When the player touches or technically collides with the enemy, HP will be subtracted from the player. What happens in GameMaker and how most games do it is that when the bounding box of the player touches the bounding box of the enemy, an event is being triggered. In our case, the collision event starts running and subtracting 1 the amount of enemy attack damage from the player HP. Note that the health is being stored in the iControl object, not the player itself, but we come to that later. The health is being depleted fast, very fast. So what is happening? One easy way to check this is to draw the HP or any variable you want to see on the screen with a simple text draw in a draw event. I do this personally a lot if I want to find out how things work during the runtime. How do we avoid this? A common practice is to implement invincibility. You have to imagine it being like a controller or switch flipped off and on. For that we go into the player create event and add 2 things. A check if we are invincible and a timer to run down if we are to reset it. So we write invincibility is false, cause we are not invincible, and invincible timer set to 20. The player will be 20 frames invincible. For now these variables do nothing, so we need to set up a constant check in one of our step events. The step event runs 60 times its code there. Every new input and updates are being processed here, and that is exactly what we need. First we check if the player is invincible, and if not, nothing happens. If he's being hit, the enemy subtracts 1 health point and sets the player invincibility on true to not harm him again. Now you have a timer that runs down until it's 0. When that happens, invincibility is being toggled on false again. And last but not least, we need to adjust the enemy collision. We write, if the player is not invincible, subtract HP and set him to invincible. Run and check out if that works. But how do we know if the player is invincible or not? Well, an indicator is needed to give a better feeling to it. One very common technique is to let the player blink white or red. That can be done quite easy. We build a second controller like before. We need a second timer, let's call it blink timer, to run down and change the color of our player. First we need to create it in our create event and we need to run it only down when the player is invincible. Because our invincibility time is very short, we let the player blink roughly 2 times in those 20 frames. So we let our timer run down, and if it is smaller or equal to 0, switch statement is triggered. There we check our image blend. Imagine it being a tinting of the sprite to draw. The image blend is an inbuilt variable that every object has and is set to default of C white. We will do a flashing by tinting between red and the default value of C white, which is nothing. Every time we change the color, we also reset our timer. Not necessary, but a good practice is putting a failsafe after our invincibility. So if the player is not invincible, set our image blend to our default. So no tinting, C white, and set the blink timer to 8. That was a lot. Next time we will advance our enemy and play around with the attack box. If you are unsure about the image blend or inbuilt object variables, I have a video that have you covered there. You are still here? Disclaimer, this is totally not an advertisement. Really, no. So I made this luck. It's not very sociable, it has no real skill, and well, can't work there more than 2 hours a day. But it can walk or be super hostile and jump on some unsurprising player. So if you like to get this for your own game, you can buy it on itch or get this plus all my other assets for a Patreon subscription. Check it out, you may find something you like.